Boy, do we have a special show for you today, and joining us today is Chris Schultz. Chris is an active angel investor and tech entrepreneur. As the founder of Voodoo Ventures, a platform that invests in companies and builds out their own products, he's invested in several companies across a diverse range of sectors at the very earliest of stages. And furthering this, in 2009, Chris co-founded LaunchPad, a community that provides workspace, mentorship, networks, and educational events to develop the talent in the New Orleans tech ecosystem. And prior to LaunchPad, Chris also co-founded Flatstack, a software development company with offices in Kazan, Russia, and New Orleans that builds applications for clients worldwide. But before we dive into the show today, don't forget to check out the accompanying article for this episode with Chris, discussing the two different types of angels and which one works best for which company. It's an absolutely fascinating read, and you can find it on SyndicateRoom.com. However, enough from me, so now it is time to bring out the man himself. Ladies and gents, may I introduce to you Chris Schultz, founder at LaunchPad. Chris, fantastic to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Harry. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I'd love to get the ball rolling by hearing how you made your way into the world of investing.
You know, it was never a life plan or a career plan. I entered it as an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur and had several businesses over the past probably 15 years or so. And over the process of being an entrepreneur and starting several businesses, I became a bit of an entrepreneur enabler. And so I like to think of myself as somebody who helps push other people to take the leap and to make the jump into starting companies. And of course, one of the constraints that people have when they are starting companies is capital. So naturally, as you're starting to push people to start companies and helping them to do it, there comes up the question of capital needs, and that sort of led me down the path into entrepreneurship. I'm happy to share sort of the story of the first time I wrote a check, if you think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. I mean, often it's the biggest concern, writing your first angel check. It's a lot of money to suddenly not dispose of, but, invest suddenly. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we can talk about LaunchPad in a minute, and maybe we'll sort of work backwards a little. But as I was running LaunchPad, the first year we were running LaunchPad, we had a number of entrepreneurs and founders in LaunchPad, and I became particularly close to one, a guy named Patrick Comer, who was founding a company called Federated Sample at the time, now called Lucid. We actually sort of were trying to raise capital for him, and this was a point where I was focused more on trying to help him than thinking of myself as an angel. And we actually went to a number of pitch meetings, met with venture investors, and had one particular venture investor in particular that I was trying to twist his arm and kind of get him on board. After spending all this time with Patrick and really getting to know him, one afternoon he walked me outside the office, and we were sort of talking through the process and how things were going. And he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "Chris, you're fooling around trying to get other people to invest. What I really want is for you to invest. Why don't you just write a check and get on board here, and let's do this?" And my response was, "Let's do this." That was my first angel investment. I wrote a $25,000 check. It was, it's a big deal. Everybody starts somewhere, and like you said, that's a lot of money, and it's not easy. But it was my belief in the company and wanting to be a part of it. And what you come to realize is skin in the game is very important. Capital is important, but also being invested. There's a lot of people in sort of an entrepreneur ecosystem that are sort of consultants and lawyers and accountants, and a lot of people that are sort of trying to help the entrepreneur, but truly putting some skin in the game is a different role, and that's what angels do, as well as other investors down the road, venture investors and everybody else, and it kind of creates a special relationship, and it's been fun. It's been a great ride on that particular investment, and then on subsequent deals as well.
And with your investments, do you ever follow on?
Yes, I have followed on. I followed on in this deal. Again, I invest as an angel, and so I have a limited pool of capital. My main business, and as an entrepreneur, sort of funds the pool of capital that I do invest with. And I have syndicated deals as well, but I don't manage a fund. But if I can, yes, I'll follow on.
And talking of syndication there and of your main business, let's talk a little about LaunchPad. And collaboration and co-working is obviously crucial to both the world of tech and investing, whether it's open source code or crowdfunding deals. So with LaunchPad, I'd love to hear what you think the benefits are of this co-working and maybe what the pitfalls are that can be avoided.
Sure. Yeah. So LaunchPad is just that, is a co-working space. It's a community. It's a community of like-minded people, entrepreneurs. One of the things that I believe strongly in is the importance of a diverse community, because I think there's some co-working that tends to be very startup focused, and I think having a broader community where you have creatives, have designers, have professionals, have attorneys in the space actually helps people to get over challenges. The biggest thing that a co-working space serves to do is get questions answered quickly. You get help from other people in a very natural way in just by working under the same roof, as well as I think there's a motivation element. I think it sort of professionalizes. You're taking your business seriously. You're going to work every day, and I'll contrast that with part of the inspiration for starting LaunchPad was when I started my first business. And this is back in the early 2000s, back in 2001, I worked for 2 years in my bedroom. And as a first-time entrepreneur, you have all of the usual questions of sort of just very simple stuff. Should I form an LLC or a C Corp and these types of things? And I would spend hours researching these things online and really unproductive time that nowadays, if you're in a co-working space, you can go get questions like that answered in 5 minutes. And because everybody's kind of going through it together, as well as it's just, it's the right motivation. I think you do tend to move faster because there's a competitive spirit, there's a collaborative nature to it. So I think co-working is a great way to fuel your business. Now, I'm happy to sort of contrast co-working and accelerators because I think they often get lumped together, and I do think that I have a different perspective on each of them. So I think from a co-working perspective, co-working is really, sort of an office space and community. Co-working is not meant to take equity in your business, and so it's really very self-driven. And I think all entrepreneurs and all businesses can benefit from actually working together in those early days. Accelerator programs are different. I think accelerators are a bit like, maybe more like a university program. They're sort of this generation's version, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or startup, of going through a university. While accelerators may or may not be for everyone, I think the importance of being in a top accelerator can't be understated. I think in an accelerator program, you are giving up equity. There's more signaling to investors for which program you go through. So I think while co-working can be very broad and just wherever you live or work, I would encourage people to do co-working. I think an accelerator is something that I would cast a very wide net in and apply to the top ones and see if you can get in, and as well as sort of being rigorous with yourself and asking the question of whether you really need it.
Is there any way investors can tap into the power of co-working and the efficiency of startups in co-working spaces? I mean, do you encourage them to come to LaunchPad and speak to the startups in the growth stages? Is that something that you encourage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as an angel, I've benefited, and I separate out my angel investing from LaunchPad, and so I've invested in some of the companies that come through. I definitely don't invest in all of them, and you can certainly be in LaunchPad without seeking investment. But from an investor's perspective, just being around companies at the early stage, you learn so much about them, and that can be sort of in many ways more qualitative than quantitative. You just learn about the hunger, the hustle, the drive of an entrepreneur. You learn about team dynamics, and I think any investor would be welcome at most co-working spaces to kind of come hang out, join, be a member. All co-working spaces like LaunchPad are run programming and education sessions, and are always looking for investors to participate. So it's a great way to get involved and to get an early view into companies.
And you said there about hustle and hunger and passion. Are those some of the key characteristics you really look for in the founders in terms of assessing them and their ability to execute on their vision and their company?
Yeah, absolutely. In the prep that you sent out to me, I think there's a question around, am I a product guy or a team guy, and very much a team guy. I think from an angel investing perspective, in the early times, it's very, very much about sort of belief in the team. And what I look for in a founder or in a founding team is experience in the industry that they're starting the company in. I think you have a huge leg up if you've got some experience in the industry, because you've seen the problems, you understand what product you want to build in order to solve those problems. You have relationships. You just know what you're getting into. So founders that have experience in an industry and are starting a company to disrupt that industry is really what I'm looking for.
That's very interesting, because I'm never sure which side of the table to fall on. When you look at some of the great founders of the past, your Travis Kalanick's at Uber never was a taxi driver, and a lot of the times the great founders don't come from that industry, and being from an industry can create too much knowledge of the pitfalls that can go wrong. Do you ever see that, where naivety actually of founder can be a big advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a very good point. And every point has a counterpoint. Every strategy, has a contrarian strategy to it. So, while I define that as my approach, I think, the naivete or even just curiosity. I think that, anybody who's been doing something too long and is sort of burnt out on looking for solutions or just has a sense of, hey, this is just the way it's always done, that is an industry that's ripe for disruption. So if and when I can find a founder who may understand an industry but is not interested in the status quo and wants to make change, that's who I like to bet on.
Absolutely. And earlier in one of the first questions, you said that you really wanted to help the entrepreneurs and be with them on the journey. So, talking of the investments in the past, you've discussed two different types of investors: engineers versus financiers. What are the two different types there that you distinguish between, and which one is right for which business? Which are you?
Yeah, that's a good question, and in a very blunt way, the way I think about those two types of investors is a engineer is investing to try to build more value into the company, where a financier is focused on extracting value out of the company, and is less focused on helping you to build your company. So I am an engineer by training. I'm an entrepreneur as well. So I very much categorize myself in the engineering camp. That I'm when I invest, I want to work with the founder and help them to build additional value into the company. For better or for worse, that's why I would invest as an angel and not less focused on sort of terms and preferences that a financier style investor might approach a deal with. By no means are those terms invalid, or is that approach invalid, particularly perhaps with what we're seeing in the market right now with some of the unicorns, those are later stage venture investors, but the dilution, anti-dilution protections and whatnot are important, and those are more of a financier approach to investing.
Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, as an investor, you're investing in businesses that solve problems, and you've written about the abundance of solutions that I'm quoting here, provided to white people problems. I'm presuming it's kind of the gourmet meals in under 5 minutes that have soy sauce and chilies, or whatever those interesting, quirky food delivery services are. So what do you mean by the white people problems? Is that it? And where do you see the potential for true problem solving on like a much wider scale?
Yeah, that is something I've written about, and I think that's again, it's sort of a little bit trying to take the piss out of a situation that exists, and perhaps it's I live in San Francisco, but I'm not from San Francisco, so perhaps it's a bit of my perspective on some of the more typical Silicon Valley startups that you see, like the food delivery businesses. Exactly. I think it's a question of perspective. And I'm a big believer in a broad worldview, both in the U.S., sort of looking to rising markets and markets that have different problems and challenges from Silicon Valley, as well as worldwide. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, this world has a lot of problems that people are truly facing, and that's the wonderful thing about startups is. You can build a business and build a successful business and be a capitalist and make money, but doing it in a way that actually helps people to be successful. And I think if you look at some of the dynamics that are going on right now in the world, and automation being one of them, and going back to Uber, that's a good example. I think there's a lot of people that are struggling to keep up. Driving for Uber is clearly not a long-term solution for a way to make money. I mean, that it's very clear that that'll eventually be automated and be self-driving cars and whatnot. And I think thinking about businesses that can be built that really do make change for people, and for people who are facing real genuine problems, not how am I going to get a burrito to my house tonight, is a really interesting way to spend time as an entrepreneur.
One interesting question that I heard the other day was about the moral dilemmas when investing in a company, and say a company like Uber, which has, in many cases in many cities, removed the ability for many cab drivers to make significant incomes that they did before. So would you ever have any moral dilemmas when investing in industries that potentially remove people from the process? So it could be, AI in customer service removing employment in that industry. Is there moral dilemmas for you when investing?
I wouldn't characterize for me a moral dilemma in those situations. I believe strongly in the inexorable march of technology. So I certainly believe strongly with Uber. I would have invested in Uber. I think that's just simply the march of technology. And while I think that sometimes Travis is a bit callous about his approach. I don't think it's going to change the end result in terms of the disruption of the taxi industry and eventually the automation with self-driving cars. That being said, I also would certainly focus my investment and entrepreneurs that I would want to help on entrepreneurs that I believe are ethical and that I believe are want to contribute to society in a positive way. So I do think that there's some ethical and moral alignment that's important to have with your own values. But by the same token, I invest, as a capitalist. I'm not a social impact investor. It's not nonprofit investing. And so, I think as long as you can align those, that's what I would focus on.
And I'd love to dive into one more question before the quickfire round, and that's one of my favourite topics, which is FOMO, fear of missing out. Now, as an entrepreneur, you've created it for investors, and as an investor, I presume you try to avoid it and be cautious of its presence, as it obviously can misguide you when investing. So how do you do that, create it, and then knowingly avoid it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in terms of the first part of creating it as an entrepreneur, it's important to create momentum, and the more you can kind of build on the momentum into, in the investor's mind, a fear that they might miss an opportunity, the better off your position. Investors, just as a rule, it's a rational tendency, will always want to be the last money in, the last person to jump in the pool. So I think it's important to create a dynamic where investors recognize that the train is leaving the station with or without them. And you can do that in a number of ways, but really it's just about creating momentum. And you do, as an entrepreneur, have to build that momentum, because investors can smell it on a deal when it's been sitting out for too long, or when it's unlikely to happen, or when it's sort of stalled and it's lost momentum. So that's an important piece of it. As an investor, I think, being cautious or being aware of FOMO. Obviously, nobody likes to miss deals, and I've had a few deals that I in hindsight wish I would have done. But there always will be another deal. So I have been in situations where I've felt like the entrepreneur is just being too pushy for me, or is just, I'm just not, I can't get myself comfortable, and I'll pass in that situation, because there will always be another deal. There's always going to be something else to invest in, and that might be different for me as a small angel investor versus a big VC fund, trying to generate their return for the LPs. But I don't get on board just because I'm kind of being herded along to get to the finish line.
Absolutely. And I'd love to dive into a quickfire round now.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, what do you know now that you wish you'd known at the beginning of your time?
I think self-awareness and understanding what my strengths and weaknesses are has been something that has come to me in an older age. It's not something that naturally comes younger, and I think seeing that in entrepreneurs is something that strikes me very positively. People who sort of are aware of their strengths and weaknesses early on.
And then what's your favourite startup or investing blog or newsletter or resource or podcast?
Yeah, I mean, other than yours, Harry, which is great, and I congratulate you on it. It's wonderful content.
Thank you so much. I'll give you $20 later.
There we go. I'm a big fan of Paul Singh. Paul was at 500 Startups, has started several companies since then, and he's got a great Twitter feed that always has great content on it. So Paul Singh would be somebody I'd refer people to.
Fantastic. And then, is there a founder you most respect or admire?
I would have to say Patrick Comer, who's my friend in the first angel investment I did, the CEO of Lucid. It may not be a company that has as much notoriety as some of the Silicon Valley companies, but Patrick is absolutely a wonderful CEO and a wonderful entrepreneur.
And then your favorite book and why?
My favorite book is Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. This is just literally a Bible or a manual for CEOs. It's such a well-written book, and I've given it to many CEOs, and it's got so many guideposts in it, so I can't recommend it highly enough.
Absolutely fantastic book. And then finally, the most recent investment you've made and why you said yes.
Sure. I made an investment in a company called the 86 Co., which is actually a liquor brand, and they have four types of liquor. And I thought that I invested because it was something where I could see the direction the market was going with the craft cocktails, and these guys were creating a brand specifically for that. And it's extremely experienced guys in the industry. They know where the industry is going, and they're very experienced in the industry, which is what I look for.
Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and absolutely fantastic to hear about your journey with LaunchPad and your entrance into the angel investing market and how you've progressed. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you very much for having me on, Harry. It was a great pleasure.
And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Chris for giving up his time today to be on the show. It was such a pleasure to hear his incredible story. And if you're loving the show, do not forget to read the accompanying article for this episode with Chris. And you can find that on SyndicateRoom.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @SyndicateRoom so you never have to miss an episode or update. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and interact with you about the show, and that's best on Twitter @SyndicateRoom. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure bringing you today's show, and we'd like to end by reminding you that early stage investing is risky, and therefore please do ensure that you engage in the proper due diligence prior to making the investment. Thank you so much, and we look so forward to seeing you next week.